Welcome to One on One. I am Cyril Stober. The health sector is in our sights today, and given the prime position of health in living and life, our focus is on research and development. The National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, NIPRID, is an agency under the Federal Ministry of Health and Social Welfare. Its main function is the research and development of drugs, vaccines, phytomedicines, commodities, and diagnostics aimed at improving access to affordable and high-quality health care. Now, how this mandate is being carried out and the current state of the Institute in contributing to Nigeria's health sector is our focus. Dr. Obi Adigwe is the Director General, Chief Executive Officer of the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development. A pharmacist, he holds a Doctor of Pharmaceutical Policy from the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom. He has had an outstanding career pioneering numerous research and development projects. He joins me on One on One. Dr. Adigwe, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
NIPRID, straightforward research and development into, we listed them, drugs, vaccines. How has this institute performed over the years?
So NIPRID is an agency that's close to 4 decades old now. And in the past close to 40 years, quite a bit has happened in the Institute, starting from the first agency of its kind to develop a phytomedicine for sickle cell anemia from 4 plants, indigenous plants, all the way to phase 2 clinical trials, Niclovix, as it's called currently, up till our biggest claim to fame recently, when we were in the trenches with you, COVID-19 pandemic, where we undertook the world's first categorical analysis on the Madagascar COVID organics preparation. That was a preparation that was sent to us by the presidency to determine whether it could actually cure COVID-19, and we're the first in the world to say that that product could not cure COVID-19. And in doing that, the evidence we generated was used across the world, and it saved millions of dollars going down to a wrong direction in terms of intervention. And then the countless lives, that were saved based on channeling products that had more evidence base to their veracity in terms of taking care of the pandemic. But more recently, the administration has placed a lot of focus on the healthcare sector, as you're aware. One of the first presidential initiatives to be announced just under 2 years ago was the presidential initiative to unlock the value chain of the healthcare sector. And shortly after the executive order on food, we also had the executive order on pharmaceutical products. And as you know, with any sector, if you're going to ensure that any reform or any intervention is sustainable and is fit for purpose for the particular population it is targeted towards, then you must ensure that R&D is at the center, is at the core of that intervention. And so there are a number of big ticket items that are going on in R&D to ensure that this big vision for healthcare is achieved. One of them is the upcoming conference and boot camp that we have just announced, which is the SPAC global initiative that's holding in a few months. What we're doing with that particular assignment is ensuring that Nigerian and African scientists are exposed to world-class mentorship, world-class ecosystem in terms of access to equipment, world-class partnerships in terms of investment and angel funding, and a world-class program that enables them to compete with the best in the world and ensure that research that's being undertaken in Nigeria is actually impacting the people, impacting the healthcare, and making also a strong impact on the socioeconomic objectives that the government has set out. The selection of the SPAC global partnership was done based on a directive from the coordinating minister, and we were tasked with identifying who would be the best partner to take Nigeria to that level. And the SPAC Global Initiative started at Stanford University about 20 years ago. And I'm sure you're aware that in terms of innovation, Silicon Valley, which is just an hour away from Stanford, is arguably the world's headquarters for innovation. All the biggest companies, if you're talking about NVIDIA, if you're talking about Tesla, if you're talking about Apple, if you're talking about Yahoo, all of them started around that Silicon Valley and drew either inspiration or manpower or innovation or technical capacity from Stanford. And that is the kind of model we're looking at replicating with this partnership. So the SPAC Global Initiative is going to come to Nigeria, and between 50 and 100 Nigerian scientists will be put within that 2-year program to ensure that innovations that come up within our contextual setting reach world-class status and hit the mark in terms of addressing contextual problems we have here in Nigeria.
One of the things we would ask easily would be the approach to finding solutions to some of the most prevalent diseases that have been with us. And let's take malaria, for instance. And this has been with us for so long. We are aware that at some point in time, NIPRID did a lot of work into malaria. What happened to that? And I'd like you to look at recent developments, where I think it was recently announced that there is now a vaccine for babies, a malaria vaccine for newly borns. How does that reflect with what work we've done on malaria in the past years?
So there are two recent interventions relating to malaria. A vaccine was approved a few months ago, but I think the one you're referring to was the announcement by Novartis and MMV regarding a coatem formulation for babies under 5 kg. That was just a few days ago, I think last week. And in both areas, the country is doing a great deal to enable us meet up with our colleagues across the world. I'll start with vaccines. Nigeria used to produce vaccines for the country and for the region from 70s up until the 90s in the vaccines manufacturing setup in Yaba, Lagos. Unfortunately, in fact, that particular facility played a key role in eradicating smallpox. That will tell you how critical Nigeria played in that space in the 70s, in the 80s, and in the 90s. That facility closed down in, I think, 1991 or 92 for renovation, and that was how Nigeria's capacity in vaccines manufacturing was degraded. Under the current administration, we said that cannot be the norm. And initiatives that started during COVID from the Federal Ministry of Health and Social Welfare ensured that at the back of COVID, where we identified that 99% of the vaccines used in Africa, or around 99% of the vaccines used in Africa, were imported from outside Africa, and represented, frankly, an unsustainable situation, especially when there was a lot of vaccines nationalism going on, meant that we needed to prioritize medicine security in ensuring that we can produce vaccines for ourselves. So the Ministry of Health and Social Welfare, whose job is to do the policy, undertook a very strong and decisive direction in putting forward the national vaccines policy. And then the agency which I head, which is NIPRID, took that policy and said, how do we now begin to ensure that this policy is implemented? Because as you're aware, Africa, not just Nigeria, is full of beautiful policies that end up as leather-bound documents on the shelves. But we said under our watch that will not happen. And we sat down and worked with two key partners. We worked with the government of Bulgaria on the leadership of Ambassador Dr. Yanko Yordanov, as well as the EU, the European Union. And we went out into the field, engaged all the stakeholders, first did quantitative data collection, qualitative data collection, and then a robust stakeholder engagement process that culminated in the development of a roadmap. Right. That roadmap, I am pleased to inform you, has now begun implementation. Under that roadmap, the European Union has announced a grant of about 18 million euros under the MAV Plus program for Nigeria based on that roadmap. That arguably is Africa's biggest grant in vaccines ecosystem. I think the closest to 18 million euros will be the South African $5 million, and I think the Rwandese $5 to $10 million as well. But 18 million is significant there in Africa. And I can tell you, based on our visits to the field, that there are close to 5 companies that have started leveraging that roadmap to look at producing vaccines in the next few years in Nigeria. That roadmap predicts that if all the key pieces are in place, a minimum of 3 companies should be able to produce vaccines for Nigeria between 5 and 10 years from the inception of that roadmap. We're a year into the roadmap, and from visits in the field, we're very sure that that's going in the right direction. So that's for vaccines. Now, regarding the artemether lumefantrine, which you mentioned was announced a few days ago by Novartis in Switzerland. Again, the Honorable Minister has taken the bull by the horn. And I'll give you a brief history of artemether lumefantrine. Artemether lumefantrine is an ACT, that's artemisinin combination, artemisinin-based combination therapy, ACT. The key ingredient, artemether, was derived from a plant that has been used in China for over 2,000 years, Qinghao. The Chinese have used that plant for more than 2,000 years to treat different ailments. And a few years ago, in the 70s and the 80s, significant investment was made by the private sector, by government, and by philanthropists to say, we now need to identify what it is in this plant that enables it to treat our people and enables it to have been in use for thousands of years. And that's how from that drug, Qinghao we derived artemisinin, and then a semi-synthetic form, artemether, now came out. In Nigeria, we have thousands of plants that our ancestors have used for a similar duration of time. For thousands of years, our ancestors have used different plants to treat different ailments. There is hardly a family in Nigeria that you don't have either one agbo or one magani or one ogwu that people take, when children are ill. And until now, it has been one of those areas that we have undertaken token efforts. And I call it token efforts because during COVID, we did groundbreaking work on some plants that we identified could help us address the COVID-19 pandemic. And we wrote to everybody writable. And I am sorry to say we didn't get sufficient response. But the Honorable Minister, Minister Salako, once he came on board, said, Adigwe, this is not sustainable. We know you've done something in nitrate, but this is beyond nitrate. We don't want a situation where we train 100 scientists in nitrate and then the whole country has to run after you. Come and lead a committee, a national committee on phytomedicines development and commercialization, so that you have the university professors there, you have the industry there, you have the manufacturers there, you have the traditional medicine practitioners themselves there. That is exactly the model that China used to get those particular interventions. And as I speak to you, that particular committee has started work. In fact, if you go to our website, www.niprd.gov.ng, on the landing page, you see one of our data collection tools that kickstarts. However, we require a strong participation by philanthropy. Going back to the Swiss example, it is heartbreaking that you have MMV, which is a Swiss European entity, working with Novartis, which is, again, a global North entity, with funding from an American foundation, John D. Rockefeller, the Rockefeller Foundation, the guy who had Standard Oil about a century ago, did an endowment. And we have billionaires, we have philanthropists in this country, and they're not paying the same kind of attention to R&D. The world over, R&D is driven by endowments. If you go to Stanford, if you go to Harvard, if you go to Oxford, if you go to Cambridge, it's endowments that drive R&D. But in this part of the world, people seem to think it's only a government affair. It will not work. Government can put the policy, but we need endowments from philanthropy to come in and engage to make it sustainable.
Right. Let me just take you back a little bit. Speaking of the artemisinin plant, I do recall that there was a time when it was thought that that plant thrived in Nigeria as well, and that there was, to some extent, a collaborative effort with the Chinese to develop and manufacture. I think at that time, that industry was domiciled not under the Ministry of Health, but I think under Trade or something like that. But it didn't survive for long. There was some kind of disagreement along the line, and all that effort went to waste. I do recall that there was indeed a manager, someone had been appointed as head of that agency, and in the long run, that effort packed up. Now we have another chance to look at this. Are we learning anything from the ashes of that failed attempt? Because you easily hear, could I call it conspiracy theories, that these countries who would rather send their manufactured medicines to us would not let Nigeria get on that same pedestal and manufacture its own.
Well, to unpack, there are about 3 key points that are required to unpack your question. First is the intervention you mentioned is obviously before my time.
Yes.
I was appointed DG about 6.5 years ago, and I'm sure this was before, you mentioned Obasanjo, which is, yeah. So I can tell you categorically that at NIPRID, in my medicinal garden, where we cultivate, where we document, where we derive samples for our herbarium, we have Artemisia annua, which is the plant from which you will derive artemisinin. And in my agency, we have also isolated artemisinin from the Artemisia annua that was grown in our garden. In fact, when the presidency sent us the COVID organics preparation from Madagascar, whilst our colleagues were simply doing safety tests, we did safety, we did efficacy, and we did fingerprinting. So we used our HPLCs to extract the active ingredient of what was sent to us from Madagascar, identified it was Artemisia annua, and compared it to the one that is grown in our entity there and did the analysis. So yes, Artemisia annua grows in Nigeria. There's no doubt about it. But you can't go about reinventing the wheel. People already have made tons of money from artemisinin. So redoing what the Chinese have done over 3 decades ago and streamlined cost-effective manners of rolling it out across the world will not be good use of government funding. So that's number one. Number two, I don't know who was the chief executive at that particular time, and I don't know who the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment was then. But one key reason why policies fail in countries like Nigeria is the inability for people in my position, people in the minister's position, to take the ball from their principal, who is the president, and deliver based on the mandate that they've been given. A few months ago, I saw a headline, I think it was in one of the business newspapers, saying that despite presidential order at the ports, despite presidential order, lack of implementation prevents the ports from working. I can tell you about several executive orders that were done over the past 30 years that have not been implemented. That is not how we roll in this administration, and I'll prove it to you. You remember that the executive order on food was given before the executive order on pharmaceuticals, about 2 months before. I can tell you categorically that from day one, even before that executive order was signed by the president, the honorable minister and the coordinating minister were having daily meetings with key stakeholders. The minute it was announced, we didn't just sit back on our oars, because people sometimes don't understand how government works. They think that once the president makes an announcement, the next day, implementation begins. No, that's not true. Gazetting has to take place. TTC needs to meet. Different agencies need to identify the engagement strategy, do the analysis. You're talking about bringing in equipment to manufacture locally without paying waivers, without paying tariffs, meaning that at this end, taxes will drop. Where are those taxes going to be gotten from so that the Nigerian educational system, healthcare system, infrastructure doesn't suffer? All these things are going on at the back end. And I can tell you that the implementation of the presidential executive order in the pharmaceutical sector which the implementation has already begun, because I've sent a team to Lagos to visit the 87 factories that are on the first beneficiary list, and they have started accessing the executive order. That executive order, from the day the president announced it till the day the implementation began at customs, was just about 5+ months. Compare this to a similar executive order, which I was privy to when I was in the private sector. Before I was appointed Director General of NIPRID, I was the Executive Secretary of the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Group. And 10 years ago, there was an intervention called the CET, the Common External Tariff, right, which meant that bringing in imported drugs, was cheaper than manufacturing medicines, because imported drugs came in then at zero duty, whereas the equipment and the APIs and the inputs to manufacture had tariffs of 20 to 30%. It took us, when I say us, it took the PMG man and stakeholders 5 years to implement that directive. Compare that to 5 months as has just been done. And that's not the only initiative. We're looking at other initiatives. I've just told you about the Ministerial Committee on Phytomedicines Commercialization, which started work. We've started engaging partners. We've sent a number of people to understudy what's going on in India, understudy what's going on in China. And once we get our data, we'll be doing more collaborative visits. You're looking at other interventions in this space. The PVAC I mentioned earlier on, presidential initiative, which has already begun to mobilize funding and already begun to put in interventions to ensure that the pharma sector actually has that value chain that we're talking about. In the past few months, you've had a company in Lagos achieve WHO pre-qualification, 2 products, first in West Africa and Central Africa. You've had a commodities manufacturing company produce HIV kits, again, WHO pre-Q, first in the region. You have a company in Ogun State set to open what is arguably Africa's biggest API manufacturing facility. API is the active pharmaceutical ingredient, which India banned the export of during COVID. And if that ban had lasted just a month more, the entire Africa would have been without medicines. Apart from that company set to open in Ogun State, as I'm speaking to you, based on a grant that my agency won from Afrexim Bank based in Cairo, I have equipment arriving at NIPRID as we speak. When I say as we speak, today, right, to set up an API concept production and training facility. But we're looking at the entire value chain. So you would recall I had mentioned the intervention with Spark Global. Right. That's R&D. So that rather than us having professors who have hundreds of publications, hundreds of patents, but 0 products in the market, the Spark Global program will ensure that as you are making those innovations, it is ending up as products. But it's one thing to derive R&D. It's another thing to take that R&D to the manufacturing sector. Remember, it's called a pharmaceutical business or a pharmaceutical industry. So that value chain ensures that as you're getting great ideas from R&D, at this end, Nigerians are actually taking products that are manufactured in Nigeria, and at the same time, jobs are being created, capacity is being built, revenue is being generated, and technology is being transferred.
Well, we'll look at that in greater detail after this timeout, because we'll take a short break now. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
TA Tuesday Live, a network issue-oriented innovation talk show.
Why should we be in a difficult situation financially?
Once upon a time we were rich, but we're not a rich country anymore.
Disaster management is everybody's business.
In all these times, the organization turned to Nigeria.
We would as much want to harness the capacity that is within us so that we see how we can become self-reliant.
1 month ended and you said you are increasing warning strike by 2 months. I mean, you are incubating madness. Even if these are officials of government who have been told to go and enforce the law and they have gone against the law itself, they must be held accountable.
One-on-One, Friday, 10:30 p.m. on NTA Network.
Thanks for staying with us. I'm still here with the Director General CEO of NIPRIT, the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, Dr. Obi Adigwe. We were on the subject of producing our own drugs and ensuring that Nigerians are taking those medicaments that are produced locally. Again, I ask you, yes, we're on the path, but it's been suggested that without a very strong will, those multinationals who are in the business of exporting those drugs and ingredients to Nigeria would stand in the way, either making sure that you hardly ever get certification from international bodies set up to do that. How do you respond to that?
So that's a ceiling that we've already started breaking. And you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned strong will. Nigeria has a big market, over 200 million individuals. And what is our burden is paradoxically also the market niche. So you just mentioned malaria, where we account for about a quarter to a third of if you're looking at morbidity all the way to mortality. If we didn't have the kind of will we had today in the sector, all these multinationals, like you said, would run rings around us. But before that company broke the glass ceiling and achieved 2 WHO pre-Qs, a decade ago, the guy who owned the company, a British guy, actually sold up to a French company and left. But business always looks at what policy direction people are going. And, in the first few months of the administration, people internationally sat back and watched. First is who's being appointed to the sector. And you have coordinating Minister Pate, who turned down a Gavi job to come and coordinate the healthcare ministry. You have Minister Salako, who is an African champion for One Health. These are serious minds. And then all the guys who are heading the agencies are equally serious-minded fellows, known internationally. So that's a step in the right direction. People are watching these things. And then they listen out to the statements that are being made by the administration, where you say that we would no longer accept wholesale importation. We're looking at building our own sector. And we are happy to work with you as partners. And then you look at the business mechanics. You would recall that a few years ago, it was impossible for people who invested in Nigeria to repatriate their capital. Today, that is no longer an issue. A few years ago, you literally had to go and look for, wads of dollars if you needed to travel because you couldn't use your Naira card. That has just been sorted out. These are signals people look out for. So in the healthcare sector, based on empirical evidence, based on the work that's being done, based on the leadership, and then based on the prioritization, because my sector, pharma, has never been this prioritized. And I've been working in and out of government informally since 2000 and formally since 2004. And the kind of priority we have now, a presidential initiative, a presidential executive order, key policies, migration, Medipool, the the Phytomedicines Commercialization and Development Committee, it's never happened. And it's not just that these are statements that are made and nobody follows up. The statements that are made, there are officers who are put on as you hold onto this and report to me on a weekly basis how you get on. And like the evidence suggests, it is clear that a lot of those executive orders, a lot of those initiatives are working.
Right. Dr. Adigwe, let me take you on. As a researcher yourself, knowing that you mentioned it at the start of this program, that Africa, Nigeria, has so many plants, so many, that our forefathers used to address all kinds of ailments. All right. You still have people with that knowledge. What I'm asking at this point is the level of research and collaboration in integrating all these efforts. There are many scientists, and I met some of them in the night period of old. I don't know if they're still there. I met some of them who were vast in both traditional therapies and in the scientific work here. How well is the integration and research going on? Because we look at this situation where people who have knowledge, but there's no scientific or empirical evidence to show that these things work. But they do work from having been used over time. And the fact that many of them are not documented. Some of these practices are still shrouded in what might be called mysticism.
Well, so that is the exact reason why the Honorable Minister has put together this committee. Mm-hmm. And we have two key traditional medicine practitioners as members of the committee. You're right that sometimes the practices that are associated with some of these products breed certain skepticism. But that is the role of science. The role of science is to identify what works and what doesn't work. Even in Asia, when you go to take tea, there is a ceremony that surrounds the tea making and the tea drinking process. But India and China have successfully integrated their own traditional medicine practices into how they are able to provide care for their people. And don't forget, like I mentioned, NIPRID has the status of been there, done that. So we took 4 plants from a traditional medicine practitioner that evidence, anecdotal evidence demonstrated had been used for sickle cell anemia. And we took it through preclinical studies all the way to phase 2 clinical trials. Phase 2 clinical trials means that safety and efficacy have been established. So what we're trying to do now is to say, yes, NIPRID, you know how to do it, and you've done it with your partners, but it needs to spread to the whole of Nigeria, and it also needs to spread across to the other value chain partners.
On the lighter side, the traditional practitioners, excuse me, they yield the secrets willingly, like we hear that sometimes they speak to plants, and some plants for medicinal purposes are gathered at specific times, whether it's at dawn or evening time, and certain things that are just shrouded in so much secrecy, they yield them all?
Well, so part of what we developed at NIPRID, because during COVID, there was a deluge of claims, and government tasked us and said, NIPRID, help us develop a framework that will enable us sieve the wheat from the chaff. So we called together about 20-25 professors, vice chancellors, and eminent scientists, and sat them down and said to them, this is the problem. Can you identify a framework for us to use? And what you just mentioned is part of what came up in that framework. Transparency and the fear that if they give up the knowledge, they will be cheated by science or by industry or by government, prevented practitioners from saying what they knew. And in a part of that NSAC, that's the National Scientific Advisory Committee report and framework, it is addressed there. So that you have a section where the practitioner mentions, and you have a section where the scientists and onboarders categorically say who owns the intellectual property. But that thing you mentioned about collecting plants at certain times of the day and speaking to plants, it's not exactly magic. I think there is empirical evidence that supports that if you collect plants at a certain part of the day, you have a higher concentration of some of the phytoactive substances, either in the leaves or in the part you're collecting. And then I know that if a Venus flytrap can snap up an insect by the insect being around, they probably listen to us as well.
Oh, well, Dr. Adigwe. Well, back to the question of research and development. Now, you did mention that the private sector is not that, willing when it comes to being involved. Endowments speak of that, and they're in short supply, given the number of wealthy individuals and organizations that we have in the country. How much engagement has gone with the private sector towards this?
So I'll tell you, I know this because after I took my first degree at the University of Jos, I took my master's degree from the University of Edinburgh, and like you mentioned, I took my PhD from the University of Leeds. And in the global north, endowments form a significant proportion of what drives research and development. Unfortunately, we don't see the same level of commitment here. Abroad, you find people who probably have their parents pass on from hypertension, and they say, from my parents' estate, we give half of the entire estate towards research into hypertension. You find people who know that they suffered from a debilitating disease, and in their will, they say, whilst a certain proportion goes to my family, this other proportion should go towards research into this disease that I suffered throughout my adulthood or throughout my geriatric years. I haven't seen that kind of example in Nigeria. And I know we have billionaires in this country. I know we have philanthropists who, with a little bit of engagement, and that's why we need people like you, powerful voices, erudite health communicators, to let them know that philanthropy goes beyond providing food for the needy. If you provide bags of rice, cartons of noodles to the needy, you've done well. But if you put that same funding towards research for noodles that come from cassava that's grown in Nigeria and that has all the vitamins and all the minerals, so that if somebody takes one meal of noodle in a day, one noodles meal in a day, they will be sufficient and will not suffer from malnutrition. You've done a lot more than just buying rice or noodles or imported, whatever it is they buy, and give it to people who are in the lower socioeconomic strata. So we need to see more of that. During COVID, it was appalling because we had people who were in Nigeria and who were in the same sector, like the lady who sang Coat of Many Colors. What's her name again?
Dolly Parton.
Dolly Parton. You had people in her sector in Nigeria that were more interested in throwing COVID parties. Dolly Parton gave $1 or $2 million to research into COVID. The private sector did good in putting together COVID, if you remember.
Right.
But they could have done better by transiting from COVID to COVID Plus for research when COVID went into abeyance. So you see where I'm coming from. You have philanthropists who are doing a lot. All of them have foundations. But they could do a lot more by investing in research and development. Because if you invest $1 in providing for the community around you, that same dollar would yield another $1 in terms of addressing their needs. But it would yield $10 if it were put into research and development. And more importantly, Africans and the black race look up to Nigerians, okay? So for diseases that predominantly target black people, things like sickle cell,
right.
It's a black man's disease, things like prostate issues, also black men, things like fibroids, also black women, and certain types of hypertension, okay? These are things that we could, say this is our responsibility. Same thing that happened in Festac 77, right, where the whole of the black race looked up to us to lead in terms of cultural revival of the black man. We can be doing that for these diseases that predominantly target us.
With the effort in addressing sickle cell, what have we seen in terms of the results? Have we seen lower figures? The awareness, of course, is high now that many people are more aware of their genotypes than in the past. But with the interventions and the efforts that have gone into the sickle cell vaccine, where are we today?
So sickle cell is an interesting one, and it's one of those areas that is bitter, presents a bittersweet situation for me personally. The first assignment I took on as Director General of NIPRID was to rescue Neprisan, which had been developed by my forebears.
Right.
The late Professor Wambebe led that effort, but they had signed on to production with a foreign company who let it go into abeyance. And the very first assignment I was given by the Minister of Health then was to rescue it and license it to a local manufacturer to produce. And I did that very successfully. May and Baker took that license, and we trained them at our facility here in Naipred, and they transferred that technology to their facility in Ogun State, and they produced it as Niclovix.
Okay.
And I also have very personal, very, very personal stories with sickle cell anemia. In fact, the first thesis I wrote for first degree was on sickle cell anemia. I was supervised by Professor Ogoro. And we as Naipred have done a lot for sickle cell. And like you rightly mentioned, there is a greater awareness for sickle cell. But that is the sweet. The bitter for me is that right now, you actually have interventions that can cure sickle cell. Yes. CRISPR is a new technology developed and just licensed by the FDA in America that can actually cure sickle cell. But the costs, again, this is where, allowing the global north develop interventions for us comes into play. The cost is prohibitive. So you're talking of a better part of $1 million. In Nigerian currency today, that's over 1 billion to cure sickle cell. So that's the bitter part for me. But the fact that it has been done in the global north and there is now a definitive cure for sickle cell means that, some of the philanthropists in our sector can see what is doable if there is investment in R&D. And I still think that there is room for more collaboration with these entities in terms of ending that disease.
Right.
Because it is endable.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Adigwe, we just have a couple of minutes left on this program, and we'd like to cap it off with what you foresee in the immediate, the near, and in future for, taking research and development, particularly diagnostics.
So for diagnostics, I see a bright future because under the PVAC umbrella and under the initiatives going on in this administration and those that I know are in the pipeline, there are at least 10 world-class diagnostic companies I know who are at different stages of setting up in Nigeria. What it means is that Nigerians can now have malaria kits, HIV kits, and pregnancy kits, and other kits produced here in Nigeria. Jobs will be created, and we're sure about the quality of the work that's being done. But more importantly, because I know we can't finish this program without people talking about the cost of medicines. With the swift and ruthless implementation going on the presidential executive order in the pharmaceutical sector, I make bold to predict that in as little as 20 to 40 weeks, there will be a slight comparative drop in the cost of medicines. And within the next 20 months, with the submissions I've seen for new vaccine factories, expansion of therapeutics factories, there is going to be a boom in the pharmaceutical sector. And with that, we'll have more jobs and a significant chunk of the GDP coming from our sector.
And it is on that optimistic note we'll have to leave this conversation. Dr. Obi Adigwe, Director General, CEO of the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development, thank you for being on One-on-One. I would like to ask you to come again sometime so we can update the various developments that are taking place in research and development. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you for all the great work that you guys do. I remember when we were in the trenches during COVID, you guys have continued to do a good job.
Oh, keep doing that. Thank you. And that's our program today. We thank you for watching. Next week, we'll be back with One on One. I am Cyril Stober. Bye for now.